off Steve. So thank you everyone for joining us on today's webinar, Accelerating Your Sitecore CRO Program. It's a topic, as you'll see, it's pretty close to our hearts and something which we spend a lot of time talking about, both on the CRO side and Sitecore. Steve, just flip over to the next slide, please. Probably quite a few people on the call are familiar with myself and probably with Steve, but for those of you who are not, my name is Mario Kiriakou, and I'm joined by my colleague Steve Renshaw. We are the co-founders here at Ratio, and I'm very pleased to see that Steve today is going to be running us through two topics which are quite important to us as an organization. We always, when we set up the business 9 years ago now, Steve, to next slide, please. We had two things that we were always obsessed about. One was using data to define what is a good experience from the customer's perspective, and then looking at marketing technology to define and implement that vision. And so today we're really pleased to talk about two things which a lot of people in the business spend a lot of time talking about. Sitecore, it's a platform we know inside out. We've worked with many different types of Sitecore clients across a range of different sectors, but all with sort of universal challenge, which is they bought into a vision of a platform that can do an awful lot from a customer experience perspective. But the question always is, what is the strategy and what is the best way of implementing that to get the most out of investments? And then another part is CRO and how do we optimize your websites going forward? We've got a little QR code on the screen in front. We love people to engage with us, follow us on LinkedIn. We post everything we do in terms of blogs, webinars there as a channel for our audience. So please follow us. And at this point, I will hand over to Steve to kickstart today's presentation.
Thanks, Mario, and hi, everybody. Thanks very much for joining today. Good to see a few familiar faces on the attendees as well. So I wanted to start by posing the question, why are you here today? And this is usually a starting point for most of the conversations we have with people we work with. And I've got a fair idea of why that is. We've been around the block a few times, and usually we encounter the same problems again and again and again. But we're going to use the magic of technology with Zoom just to run a very quick poll. Really just for us to see if any of the challenges we commonly see are common within this group as well. So Mario is just going to pop a poll up on your screen now, and what you'll see is a few multiple choices. You can choose one or more if you want to. So you might be limited by the Sitecore website that you're working with, the technical capabilities, the organizational buy-in, just time or resources really. So if I just give you 5 seconds just to have a quick scan of that. And let us know what is currently holding you back. And what we'll do in just a moment is take that poll away. And what I'm going to talk about next is, again, some of the things that we see. So a typical story for a Sitecore customer is this one. We bought a Ferrari, but we're driving a Skoda. Now, I couldn't find a picture of an old Skoda. This is a new one, but it's the same principle applies. You buy into this massive marketing dream with platforms like Sitecore and Optimizely and Adobe. But actually, most of the time, people are not using most of the bells and whistles these platforms come with. And part of our role is to try and help them unlock that capability and use it more. But that's not the only problem. The problem can also be organizational. It could be most of our clients are under pressure to show return on the investments they've made in technology. Again, a common theme, especially if you've got these big platforms that cost huge amounts of money every year. A big focus at the moment is on how we do more with it. Another common thing we see, and this seems unrelated at first when you look at it, but it is completely related, is we're spending a fortune on development, but we're not seeing an uplift. And the reason we see that is because people are spending, and in order to develop all these platforms costs a huge amount of money. So if you're spending £100,000 developing a whole new journey on the site, but actually you're not seeing an increase in conversions, wouldn't it have been better to do more upfront work in the first place to make sure that those changes were going to work? Another common one is we just don't have the time. Frequently, digital teams could be 1, 2, maybe 3 people, and actually the skill sets and the availability and capacity to actually focus on things like conversion rate optimization is something that a lot of people are lacking, but it does need focus. But just taking a step back, what do we mean by CRO? So CRO, in the context of what we're talking about today, is the process of optimizing the user journey to help users get to the place they need to get to, reducing friction, increasing relevance as part of an ongoing sprint cycle of experimentation. And what I mean by that is that whenever we approach a CRO program, we're approaching it from the position of a customer, not from a position of just trying to increase sales, because there's a lot of steps that come between them becoming aware of you, hitting the website, and actually getting to a conversion. Sometimes they can take multiple visits, sometimes it could be on first visit. But it's all about trying to get them to the place they need to get to as quickly as possible. And the Sitecore engine itself is extremely powerful. There's a lot of things, a lot of toys within the toolkit that you've got with Sitecore. So A/B testing, personalization, goals, emails, rules engine, automation, and profiling. So there's a lot that you potentially can do, but often navigating your way through it, finding out what's the best way to start is more of a challenge than actually setting some of these things up. So why are you stuck? I always say that running an experimentation program is almost 70% knowing where and how to do it, and the rest of it is turning on the rules, doing the designs that support it, and so on. And this is, and I put my hands up when I started on my journey with Sitecore many years ago. This is probably where we tripped up as well. We thought it was just a case of switching on some rules in a personalization engine, and it would start delivering, more conversions, more sales. And actually, that's not the case. And you need quite a significant skill set and capability around analysis, data, heat map, even customer surveys, and KYC here, which is know your customer, even understanding what it is a customer's looking to do, what's their intent, what problems are they having, what friction points are they encountering, what are they actually trying to get to do on their journey. Once you have all that data and analysis behind you, only then can you really start running an effective CRO experimentation program. So knowing where to optimize the journey, where to update things like button colors, messaging, page structure, even down to changing the experience down to device level. So a lot of this is about knowledge. The second place where we find a lot of people get stuck is that they can't test where they want to. So I've just taken an example here. I think Virgin Trains is still actually on Sitecore, but we've got a page here. If you're familiar with Sitecore, what we're looking at is effectively 3 components. Now, let's say that we want to run an experiment to try to increase the number of people going through to our booking engine from this page. So one of the things we want to try and do is in the hero banner, add a quick ticket search. So just a very simple way for people to search for tickets without having to go through a deeper journey first. So reducing clicks, reducing friction. The second thing we might want to do is to bring in some proof points. So we might want to say booking direct with Virgin Trains is going to save you money. Now, we want to put those in our page, but the problem we're probably going to have is that if these components don't exist already in Sitecore, we can't actually use them. So we're already stuck at point 1. So we've got 2 high-value tests here, which in ratios world, we've seen to be extremely successful, but we can't do it because we don't have the components to support it. So all of a sudden we're stuck. We might have to start doing development. The other problem we often come against is that we can't test anything at all. And that's because the entire Sitecore site has not been built to best practice. So we have seen examples where entire pages like this have been built as one component. And what that means is we can't test anything at a more granular level. So there's also a technical element to this as well, especially when you're in the Sitecore and other CMS worlds, is having that flexibility built in the first place. So what's involved in a successful CRO program? A lot of things, but primarily the skill set. So as I mentioned before, having the ability and capacity and skills to be able to properly analyze your user journeys, to know where you're going to try and optimize and test, even down to CRO mindset. And by with that, I mean the ability to look at a problem or look at a user journey dropout issue and being able to hypothesize where we're going to make changes. So CRO in itself is a skill, but also platform as well. So if you don't have the skills to use the platform you've got properly, which is, again, something we encounter on a regular basis, it's quite difficult to make a start. The second is velocity. So being able to create a program of work on the CRO side that is constantly moving, where we've got a roadmap backlog, where we've got agile delivery and sprints. And then lastly, culture. So plugging in a CRO program into what you're doing already is not necessarily that simple. It does need skills and capabilities. It needs KPIs around it. It needs to be part of your strategy, and it needs constant attention. And it won't work if you're just treating it as a side project. The number of people we speak to who have just tried it for a couple of weeks and then given up, it doesn't work like that. It needs constant attention. It needs budget behind it, and it needs people behind it. So what's the answer? And this is going to be the meat of what we're going to talk about today. We have terminology I'm going to be using for the rest of the presentation to a degree, and that is server side versus client side. And just to explain what that means at a very high level, on the left-hand side, you've got server side, and that is effectively what Sitecore is. It's a server side A/B testing, personalization, and experimentation engine. So what that means is it runs on the server, it runs within the website, not on the client's browser. So the changes you make are delivered by the server to the client's browser. Client side, on the right-hand side, is where we are exposing tests through a client's browser, so it's not being driven by the server. Now, that might be a bit technical, but there are pros and cons to both, and I'll just talk about those quickly so you understand the context for the solution I'm going to be talking about a bit later on. So like I said, on the server side, which is effectively Sitecore, we have pros and cons. So Sitecore is a very, very powerful engine, but it doesn't do everything perfectly. So it has a lot of native functionality, those rules and those tools we looked at earlier. You can create highly customizable rules, which is not something you can necessarily do with other client-side platforms. It has a great depth of personalization, and I'll explain why that's important later. It's also got a lot of data integration capabilities. So if you want to personalize to a user based on their CRM record, for example, you can do that within Sitecore by linking it up. And that's not as easy to do when you get to client-side testing. It also copes better with omnichannel. It's got an email platform in there. It's got automation. It's very good at spitting data in and out. It has more complex tests, and it doesn't have the problem that sometimes you can come across on the client-side testing world, which is flicker. So where the page is loaded before the test is loaded, and you get a slight flicker on the page. The downsides are, and this is key to what we're talking about today, really, is that you can only test within existing components. So going back to what I was talking about on that Virgin Trains site, if we don't have the right components, we can't apply testing or personalization. So you're limited to the structures you have. And if you wanted to do something different, you have to do development. And it can take longer to set up as a virtue of all that as well. On the client side, there are pros and cons as well. So it tends to be quicker and easier. If you're plugging in a third-party tool like VWO or Convert or A/B testing, which are some of the platforms that we've used in the past, they're not expensive, but it is a third-party platform. It tends to be more for simpler tests. It has less complexity, less integration capability, although there is some. And you're not constrained by the components. So you can, if you want to build that proof points or the ticket search components, then you have more freedom to just plug those in through something like a VWO tool. And I'm going to be referring to VWO for the rest of the presentation just to save on logos. Doesn't always need development, but it often does. So a lot of it, but it's mostly front-end development. So what that means is that rather than spending 3 days creating a component in Sitecore, you can do it in probably half a day. And that means you can get stuff out quicker, you can test it quicker, you can see the impact before you develop it in Sitecore. So what we're also looking at here is an economy of developments, trying to make sure that we are doing experimentation-led development, saving you money and making sure that you can justify the ROI beforehand. The downsides of it, it is limited for more complex tests. You can't do as much in terms of functional testing. It's more for changing page structures, HTML type changes. You can do quite a lot though. So you can change, if you've got a form on your website, for example, if the backend functionality remains the same, you can actually change entirely how the form looks on the front end. So there is some scope there on the client side testing tools. It relies on the page structure not changing. This is really a problem if you've got a home page that's being constantly updated with new structures and we've got a button in there somewhere or a component. It just needs some thought and process and governance around how we're doing the testing. Limited personalization as well. So we can do A/B testing extremely easily, of course. Personalization though, within the Sitecore world, there's 100+ rules out of the box. And we don't have quite that level within client-side testing tools. And again, I'll explain how this feeds into actually iterating tests, so you can do that later on. And like I said, Flickr can be a bit of an issue, not insurmountable. It can be an issue sometimes. It needs a bit of work sometimes to get it working how you want it to. So that's a quick overview of the pros and cons. So what is the sweet spot? How are we going to run a CRO program where we potentially got pros and cons on both sides? We've got objectives we need to achieve. We need to move quite quickly, and we don't really know where to start. So taking it back to basics, I'm going to take you through, I think, a 4 or 5 step process, and this is how we approach it ourselves. And it comes down to proper planning, proper execution, careful measurement, and then a process around how you're integrating your CRO methods together and with development. So step 1 is effectively creating your backlog of tests. So if you've got 4 key steps to your user journey, you've got your homepage, category page, product page, and so on. You might have a series of tests that your CRO team or someone in your marketing team has put together and thought, actually, we think this will be a good idea. And that can be based on the data and analysis I mentioned earlier. It could be UX best practices. It could be feedback we've had from customers. But really what we want to try and do is just get it all down onto a page by user journey step, and then start to think about what are our priorities. And those priorities might be based on business objectives, but it's primarily going to be based on value versus complexity. So if we think about now structuring our post-it notes into, if you like, a value versus complexity quadrant, we can start to think about how difficult is this test going to be to implement. So how complex is it? Do we need third-party data? Do we know enough about the customer to even run this at this point? How much development is going to be required to execute it? So we might have things that are going to be really, really high value and low effort, like we have in the top left of the quadrant here, and that could be just be changing a button color or maybe moving something off the page on a mobile device. On the top right, we could be looking more at something that's going to be really high value for us, but it's going to require CRM data to be integrated, and that is going to require work because it doesn't exist at the moment, etc., etc. So what we're trying to do is just get a view of what we can achieve now, quick wins, if you like, and things where there's potentially an opportunity to spend a bit more effort and time on them because we think there's going to be value in doing them. And things at the bottom half of this quadrant, if you're taking your first steps, it's probably not something you're going to do right now. But by going through this exercise, what you will end up with is effectively a roadmap. And I'll come on to why this is important for the client side and server side in a second. But the roadmap is really going to define the order of execution of all these experiments that we've prioritized here. So do now, do next, and do later, with do later being the stuff that's going to require a lot of back-end plumbing, a lot more thought, analysis, and so on. The do now being obviously more the quick wins. So now we've got our roadmap, we've got our to-do list, and we generally split our to-do list up into sprints. So we will have planned out a list of tasks that we're going to undertake over the next month in probably two-week sprints. And each month we'll review that to-do list and we'll make sure that we're on track with our goals, objectives, with our testing velocity. And that's a living, breathing thing as well. So we'll always be updating it based on test learnings that we're getting as we go along. But our to-do list really is going to split down what we're going to do with Sitecore and what we're going to bring in a third-party tool like VWO to do. So on Sitecore, we might say, okay, we've already got a homepage hero. We want to personalize that based on last product view. And actually, we did this about 3 months ago for one of our travel clients, and we saw a significant uptick in people getting back into the booking funnel again. So that's something that potentially we can do right now with Sitecore. So we wouldn't necessarily want to do that within a client testing tool. But if we couldn't do anything with the homepage hero in Sitecore, that's when the client side tool comes in. Now, something else we might want to do, and this is again down to the complexity and ability of Sitecore, we might want to show a list of tickets for our holiday or whatever it is, ordered low to high. And because that pricing data is coming from a third-party platform, we need to request that in a format that's going to support the personalization we want to achieve. So again, that's not something you can do with a client-side tool because it relies on that back-end integration, but it's something we do with Sitecore. On the client side, we're probably looking at those simpler tests. So, for example, here I've got maybe that new proof points component we saw in the Virgin Trains example. Might want to switch out the form, reduce the number of fields. So as long as the backend integration is still there, we can swap out the front end styling, and much quicker than doing it in Sitecore. We could also maybe add a floating contact us CTA on key product pages. And again, this is something we've seen a lot of success with, particularly in scenarios like banking, where there's potentially confusion, complexity, people want help. Making those CTAs more visible, having it float down the page as a user scrolls down can be a real nice quick win that you can implement in a day, you know, with something like VWO, but it might take 2 or 3 days in Sitecore. So now we've got effectively our to-do list for our first sprint or 2 sprints, now split into server side versus client side. So we've got 2 types of testing here. And this is why, if you read our blog article, we talk about 2-track testing. So effectively what we're doing is we're running the same process, our experimentation process of test plans, QA, UAT, production, and launch. We're running those alongside each other. Now, you don't have to. Obviously, you can just run one at a time. You might think that VWO is just simpler to get going with, but you can obviously run them at the same time. But it's a 2-track approach that means that we're not just funneling ourselves down the Sitecore route. We're not just fudging around. We're trying to do development. We're held up. Project stalled. It's costing too much. We've got a second option there to do things quicker. And that means we can get testing out the door, we can get results in quicker, and it helps build the business case for doing more with Sitecore. Now, within our experimentation tools, whether it's Sitecore or VWO or another platform, we'll have metrics. Sometimes we use the metrics in those tools, oftentimes, and in fact, a lot of the time we don't. So this is all about the measurement. So where are we seeing successes and failures? So this is an example of a real world client who are currently running, this is actually a live experiment, I think. They're currently running a test on their inquiry forms, call to actions, and so on. We're pulling this data into GA4, and we're creating a model within GA4 that allows us to report on test effectiveness within an interface that everyone's familiar with, where we're already modeling data. So we've got a consistent view, and this can be quite important because if you've got data all over the place and measurement all over the place, there's often no one single view to tell you how this plus your normal website performance, what metrics they're actually achieving. So we find it much easier to pull everything out into GA4 by just integrating this data out. Anyway, we have our measurement now of success or failure. And then this is the really interesting part, and this is the bit that's going to save you money and also help direct your development roadmap. So we've been running our tests with VWO, we've got successes or failures. What we're going to do with the unsuccessful tests is we're going to either take them out of the backlog altogether, or we're going to refine them. And there's no such thing as a bad test. Everything is a learning. So if you put a button on a page and no one clicks it, or you change the color, or you change the structure, and it has no impact on conversions, well, that is interesting in itself because it's telling us that actually users are either unaffected by that change or they're getting stuck somewhere else. So every test is a learning, whether it's success or failure. But we put those back into the backlog and we either scratch them out or we try and refine them and do more with them and change direction a little bit. We'll often do that in flight as well. But if it's successful, then we have, for example, our proof points banner on the Virgin Tickets website earlier. If we find that we feel that people are actually, that's driving people through to the next stage of the journey, then we can say, right, okay, we spent half a day building that, but now we know it's successful. We actually want to implement it on Sitecore. We want to build it and develop it. So we can then justify the spend on 3 days of development or whatever it is to then go and build, test, deploy, implement in Sitecore. But what it means also is that once we've got it in Sitecore, if you remember earlier, I was talking about that rich personalization engine. Well, now it's in Sitecore, we can start to apply really deep personalization as well. So we've done simple testing with VWO, and now with Sitecore, now we know it's successful and people are engaging with it and it's having a positive impact. We can start to say, okay, why don't we change that component a bit more and say, if someone has visited the site 3 times, we want to show them slightly different proof points. Likewise, if we have our ticket search, if we know that you've previously searched for 2 adults and 2 children, then we probably know you're a family buyer. So therefore we can start to maybe introduce more family-based imagery. So I'm talking about client side and server side, but you can probably see by now that the two are actually really integrated for the successful test, because we're using Sitecore's engine then to really, I call it sweating those components, so making them work as hard as possible. Once we know that works, then we can start to layer all that functionality in. And I've spoken about experimentation-led development, so not wasting money on development that actually doesn't have an impact. And this is really key to it. So we have our experimentation life cycle here, which I've kind of talked through already. So planning, launching, analyzing, iterating, and then adding to code base the successful tests. And this then feeds the software development life cycle. So where we've got that proof points or ticket search component, we're then putting them into a discovery process for our development team. So how much would it take to build it? What else do we want it to do? How complex does it need to be? What integrations are there, and so on? And then it's going through our normal development life cycle. So you have a constant flow then of successful tests being transferred into development and then put on the site. And like I said, then sweated further with Sitecore's own rules engine. So to sum all that up, before I come on to a couple more things, so the process, in summary, it's create the backlog, work out what's client side or server side based on complexity or how ready the technology is in terms of Sitecore. Implement those, test them, and then when we've got successes, we then build those into the backlog. Things to watch out for. I'd like to go a lot deeper on this, but just a few things to consider. If this is your first foray into experimentation, your first time using Sitecore maybe, or VWO, there are a few things to consider. One is picking the right time and place for doing experimentation. So if your homepage is about to change wildly based on a business requirement or a campaign or something else, you need to consider that in the context of your priorities of tests. Also, if you're going to be sending out an email blast to 100,000 people tomorrow, that's going to skew your numbers quite considerably. And it might affect the confidence of the results of the experiments that you're running. So it's always good to have a handle, and that's part of the process and governance that needs to be around this of when you're actually going to be testing. The second is statistical significance. We often use Adobe's I can never say this, sorry, statistical significance calculator. And that will allow you to plug in some numbers around your traffic, around your expected conversions and so on. And it will give you an idea of how long a test needs to run. So there's no point just running a test for a week if the traffic doesn't support a confident result at the end of that week. So if I've only got 500 people, it doesn't make any sense running that test for a week. I need, thousands potentially, or ideally. So that will give you that number of weeks that you need to run a test for in order to get to a confidence level, hopefully of about 90, 95 or higher %. And that's really important. If it looks after the first week that it's a failure, but if actually it's a 4-week test, then keep it running, because it could just be chance. It could just be, it could be whatever reason people aren't hitting the site that week. And so you're getting skewed numbers. You need enough traffic going through it to make it a positive result and a confident result. I've said before, even a bad result is a learning, and also maintaining momentum. So if you can get into the habit of having a sprint process around this, same as you do for development, where you've got a constant backlog of things you want to test, things you want to iterate, things you want to refine, it needs that attention every couple of weeks, because tests don't run themselves. There'll be things that you always want to try and change. You might make a change on the site that actually has an impact further down the line, so you want to test that as well. It could have a positive or negative impact even. So it does need careful curation. And at 30 minutes, I'm just going to wrap up and just summarize some of the things I've been talking about. So what we're looking at here, and we are running this in the wild now with some of our Sitecore customers, and we're having, I think a couple are actually on the call. We're having great success with this 2-track approach. It's getting things done quicker. It's not putting Sitecore to one side, but it's getting into a more agile mindset where we can just get stuff done, get it up on the site, test it, see the impact, and then worry about the Sitecore stuff later. It's experimentation-led development, and it's also based on data and not opinion. So if we're looking to change a product page, then we've already done a load of testing around that. We've already got a pretty good idea of how that product page needs to look in an ideal world. So all that stuff that's been done before, all the thought, process, experimentation, that's all feeding into an ideal design. It's backed up by UX, backed up by the data we already have. So this experimentation-led development, again, we do this across a few clients, and it really is a massive conversion booster on the other side, although bearing in mind the customer experience at the front. I've said before, sweating the successful experiments, we have that massive rules engine. We could even create custom rules in Sitecore, really specific rules about, bringing in if someone's coming from a mobile device, they've got a CRM record, they live in America, they visited the site 3 times, and they've shown an interest in our bicycle product, then we can chain all of that into a custom rule, and we can use that to do hyper personalization if we want to. So it's really powerful, the Sitecore engine, and that's where it comes into play best. And really what you'll end up with is a supercharged, well-oiled experimentation machine. So for our most active clients, we're probably in a cadence now of running about 10, 15, 20 tests a month. For some of our smaller clients who are just getting going, maybe 1, 2, or 3 tests. But the key is momentum. It's having that cadence of doing it every single month. And this is what allows them to do it and not be blocked by some of the things that we can find issues with in Sitecore, or indeed do things in Sitecore that we can't do within VWO or other platforms as well. And just finally, how we can help. So we've been doing this for a number of years, as you probably gathered. And we work across a range of clients, a range of sectors, and a range of maturity, from people who are just starting out through to people who have done tactical CRO but now want to get more complex. They want to do multi-page tests. They want to do tests that bring in third-party data and so on. We help those clients with those more complex plumbing type experimentation programs as well. And we do that because we've got a robust methodology. So we have all the processes in place we've developed specifically based on what we think is best and worst practice. We've got methodologies that help you move quickly, not sitting in discovery workshops for weeks on end, but just getting short, sharp, let's get stuff out the door in the next 2 weeks type of processes. So we'll help you get moving quickly if you're still in your first steps. And also Sitecore. So we've been doing Sitecore for since we started. We've been doing Sitecore for about 10 years. Prior to that, Mario and I also worked at Sitecore, advising, consulting with clients. So we can help you to unblock the technology hurdles that you have as well. And that could be just helping you to understand what you've got. It could be fixing things that you think are not working properly. It could be something as simple as just doing a quick audit and telling you what you can or can't do. So we can help with all of this, as you probably gathered. So the Sitecore CRO world is our sweet spot. Mario.
Thank you, Steve. Just quickly, before we get on to Q&A, we always look into solicit feedback for new topics, and just generally we always want to improve, but similar to continuous optimization. So there'll be a quick survey after today's webinar. You literally just take about a minute of your time. We'd appreciate any feedback that you have. So thank you. Happy to jump into questions as well. So we had a number of questions come in, and I thought the first one's quite interesting, Steve, because looking at the poll results, one of the things that polled the highest was limited by site components and functionality, which I thought really chimed well with the first question that came in, which is around, I can't currently do any testing on my site because of the way it's been built. How would you recommend I approach that?
Yeah, I think our first ever client we ever did a project with at Ratio, we walked in and we had a look at their website. We had a whole contract lined up, and it turns out the site had been built I think generously described as a bag of nails. And so we had to make some recommendations for how they would implement changes that would allow us to do what we wanted to do. So it's really a matter of prioritization, working out how and where you want to test. That bit that I was showing on that kind of bar earlier, the analysis and understanding where and how you want to test, and then you build that into a backlog and say, look, development team, we need to get the homepage hero changed or updated to allow us to make these changes. It could be as simple as that. We have seen much worse situations though, where pages have needed to be entirely rebuilt. So it depends on doing an audit really of the current page, what you're trying to do, and then making recommendations on where quick wins for development needs to be brought in ASAP.
Thank you, Steve. Another question come in. How would it work if we didn't have VWO? So it might open up a few questions really, because I suppose it's dependent on, are you looking to do all your CRO via the Sitecore platform, or is it just generally don't have access to a third-party tool?
if you don't, well, to take the latter point, if you don't have, I've used VWO as an example because we use it quite a bit. We actually use converts.com quite a bit as well, and we've used A/B Tasty. So it's not just, a lot of them are much for muchness. There's not a huge amount of difference between a lot of these tools. So if you don't have VWO, then you're probably going to be stuck with whatever you have in Sitecore. And if that's all set up well, then great, and you should be able to do, a normal testing program through it. If you don't, and you're struggling with components and getting things set up, then that's when the client-side tool comes in. So well, what we would tend to do is we tend to go through the first process first, which is the earlier process of analysis and discovery, if you like, to sort of say in the first couple of weeks, here's the quick wins we think you can achieve. Then we would go and have a look at the technology and say, okay, well, you can have VWO. The starter package is free, so we can get you up and running almost straight away. Or we might suggest another tool based on specific requirements that you have. But if Sitecore isn't going to support it, then you are going to be looking at implementing one of those third-party tools. Sitecore also, by the way, has a tool called Personalize. And that is similar to these other client-side tools where you can plug it in and you can use it almost as an add-on. But yeah, that would be my answer to that. It's what you're trying to get, where you're trying to get to, what are you trying to do, and then assess what technology works best for you.
Well, we've got time for a few more questions. Another question which has come in. You said during the talk that client-side tools are more limited in scope. Does that mean you can't integrate any data into them?
It's more difficult. So with something like, I think it's VWO or Convert off the top of my head. I think it might be Convert. It's got a, I think, no, actually, VWO does have an integration with Telium, for example, so the customer data platform. So that will ingest things like target audiences from Telium. So if you're trying to do cross-channel, targeting of customers, then Telium can share data about users with one of these tools, and then you can use that to serve an experience using them. But they tend to be more limited in terms of custom integrations. So most of these connectors are pre-built by the vendors. And that's where Sitecore is really strong, because if you want to create a connector with another platform, then you can do that through its open APIs. So that's the big difference. Yeah, so there is limited amount of integration you can do with client-side tools, but it's nowhere near the level of Sitecore.
And another interesting one to come in, which again, I suppose is lots of things to unpack around this one, is we have lots of third-party plugins for forms and CRM. Would this hold us back?
So third-party plugins, it depends how they're plugged in. If it's calling from an embed code, then we'd probably be a little bit more limited in what we could do. If it's a Sitecore form, for example, then we could use the A/B testing or personalization engine to swap it out for a similar version of that form. So there are possibilities. It would depend on the exact use case. But if it's an iframe, then you could potentially call a different source for the iframe. So you're swapping basically the iframe itself to say pick iframe A over iframe B. There's various different ways of doing that. It's quite a difficult question to answer without knowing exactly what it is you're using. But yeah, that's what I would. It's possible, potentially, is what I would say.
And it's depending on your goal as well. I mean, the CRM one's an interesting one because we have a client at the moment who, what is holding them back is that their desire is to have end-to-end lead tracking from a test variant all the way through to a cell within CRM. So at the moment, they want to fully integrate that, put the tracking in so you can pass over the winning parameters into the CRM so they know when an opportunity is created. Which test variant drove that. They wanted to be as granular as that. So again, I suppose it's always dependent on where you want to begin. What do you see as the initial quick wins? Do you accept that you don't necessarily have all the integration set up from day one? And is that something that holds you back, or is the goal really to try and build a business case by showing some impact of CRO and experimentation? We've got another question coming, Steve. We've struggled getting enough A/B testing up and running. How many experiments would you recommend running each month? I always like these questions because it will vary from client to client and circumstance to circumstance.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it earlier, I suppose, to a degree. So yeah, I mean, if you've got a team who can support it, because it does require time, right? Every single experiment is going to require content, require planning, imagery, sign off, even, you know, for our banking clients, even so a lot of our tests require legal and compliance sign off to make sure the wording isn't going to cause problems. So it depends on the type of business and how quickly and how much capacity you have within the team. I would say most of the clients we work with on a large level could be pushing through 10, 15, 20, depending on, you know, the number of people on their end who are set up to do that. And that tends to be, you know, in a multi-region type company. For our mid-sized companies, probably 3, 4, 5 a month. And not just because of time, I mean, also, you know, budget as well. I mean, hopefully the program should generate its own results to justify the business case, but, you know, often you're constrained by time, you're constrained by budget, and these tests, you know, they're not free to run. They do take time and effort on both sides, depending on how you're doing it. So I would say that, I mean, I would say if you're starting off tomorrow, you're probably looking at having a backlog, if you can, of about 10 tests that you want to run, and then prioritizing 3 based on, or even 2 based on capacity, complexity, and the value it's going to generate.
Well, thank you, Steve. I think that brings us to the end of today's presentation. I'd just like to thank all of the attendees for taking the time out of your day to join us. As I said before, you know, we love feedback. Please, you know, take the time and complete the form. Alternatively, you know, ping myself an email. I'm pretty sure everyone on today's calls got my email over the last couple of weeks, and I recognize many faces on the attendee list joining us today. So if you have any specific questions which we didn't answer during today's presentation, please feel free to reach out to myself and Steve, and yep, always happy to answer those as detailed as we can. So thank you, and look forward to seeing you on the next session.